can see the screen okay, I'll go ahead and start to move forward. So just want to say thank you to everybody and for allowing UAvionix to be part of this this evening meeting. And hopefully most everybody here is familiar with UAvionix, and if you're not, by the end of this, you probably will be. So there's always a thing I like to start when I start one of these presentations. It's one of these lines from one of the shows. It's kind of if anybody knows it, they can shout it out. But there's one of these things that comes along the lines, and it's like, well, if the next 40 slides could get a little dry. So it's just a joke. We've got lots of information here, and hopefully everybody will find some useful information here. So I'll go ahead and get started on it. So let's see. All right. So UAvionix, just so everybody knows, the company started about 2015, and really, for those who don't know what UAvionix is, we started as a drone company, a UAS. We are all pilots. I've been flying for about 35 years. Many of the principals and the founders of the company are rotorcraft pilots, fixed wing pilots, and UAS 107 pilots as well. So we saw an immediate need when ADS-B came in. That, listen, we're flying the same airspace as what all these drones and UAS are going to be in. So we wanted to protect the safety and make it cooperative for everybody. So we wanted to take and drive in that. And so a lot of our core competencies as a company is to really to be the aviation company that's looking out for pilots such as yourself and myself. And one of the key things there is really to make these avionics, I don't want to say non-traditional, but to make it affordable, make it easy to install. Because if you're an aircraft owner and you're a pilot, you know it's not getting easier, it's not getting cheaper. So we kind of like to think of ourselves as the company that's looking out for the pilot and looking out for the industry to keep us all flying. So moving on, UAvionix, we've got a couple different headquarters and locations. Everything is manufactured and built here in the United States. In Columbia Falls, we've got a headquarters for engineering in Big Fork, Montana. And then most of our regulatory and business development is done in Leesburg, Virginia. So for those who aren't familiar with UAvionix, we've accomplished a lot in a very short amount of time. This is outside of our UAS business and the drone business and infrastructure business, but in general aviation, tail beacon, sky beacon is our 978 UAT products. We have tens of thousands of them in the field. It is by far the #1 manufactured ADS-B solution on the market. The ADS-B Mode S transponders, like you see the Tail Beacon X, we've got a large number of those out in the market in the experimental. And then Tail Beacon, we'll touch base more on it. X here later. The certified, it is TSO'd, but we're waiting on an AML approval from the STC AML approval from the FAA. It's been painfully slow. And then once that goes, we'll start shipping and we'll get some information on that. We also are one of the largest portable avionics manufacturers. We make the Sky Echo in the UK and in Australia. And then we also do the Sentry for ForeFlight. We make that exclusively for them. And a large number of units go out the door every single day on those. And then recently, back in 2019, we acquired a company called Aerovonix. It came up and identified, hey, listen, we've got ADS-B on the outside, we've got portables, we need to start to move into the inside of the plane. And so panel displays is where we moved into with the AV30 and the AV20. Not currently planned to go into the full 8-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch EFIS panel displays. We're really more driving to bring modern technology, bring solid state digital screens into those classic panels, such as the Stinsons and the the vintage aircraft, but also making it easy to install into modern aircraft. So first, I'll just be real quick on this because I know most of this is ADS-B, and we're now going on 11 months post mandate. So I'll go real quick through this. And if anybody has questions, they can ask them at the end, but I did want to touch base on it. So initially, just kind of selecting an ADS-B out solution, you have to look at your costs, look at whether you want to do UAT versus the 1090 ES. If you're going to be flying over 18,000 feet, you're going to be flying international. You want to do the 1090 extended squitter. If you're interested more in the lower altitudes under 18,000 feet, you're going to fly inside the continental US. Potentially Mexico now, they're looking at the 978 UAT. And a big thing about the UAT frequency is it has what's called, it supports anonymous mode. If you're squawking 1200, you will see VFR and 1200 for your registration information. The 1090 extended squitter in Mode S, it's always broadcasting your information. So there's a little bit of a privacy factor to the UAT, which I'm a big proponent of. So, and then looking at certified versus experimental, obviously this side's heavily going to be towards the certified. Fit and compatibility, making sure if you want to go on a wing versus a tail, or if you're a little bit more bound to a traditional installation in a panel. And then, obviously, one of the things that we focus on is UAvionix is a disruptive company. We kind of come in and try and make ourselves what stands out and what's our differentiator. And so obviously lighting has been the big thing because, the wingtips, the tail, the rudder, et cetera, are all, there's power there. There are optimal locations for transmission and antennas and GPS and ADS-B reception. So goes hand in hand with GPS and LED nav lighting. So, that's a big call out that you can get a LED nav light upgrade while you're doing ADS-B. So again, kind of just real quickly go over Echo UAT is our experimental only. Sky Beacon's the wingtip. I'll be quick on these. Tail Beacon is the tail marker light. You do have to be careful on some of the tail marker lights, Stinsons and Super Cubs if they're fabric tails. There is a inner cone that protects the wiring from getting into the fabric, and that cone can sometimes interfere when you put a tail beacon in and twist it. So you do want to make sure that if you do put one in, that there is not any kind of a resistance or anything like that. And then the new flagship is Tail Beacon X. This is $2,400. That little box on the end of the tail beacon, that is your Mode S transponder and ADS-B out. It replaces what's in the panel. That right there is the first of its kind Mode S transponder with a fully integrated altitude baro encoder. It's got the WASP GPS in it, the antenna, and everything is in there. It can be controlled with the AV20 and experimental and AV30 for the certified. And then we are working with Avidyne and several EFIS manufacturers for integration to be able to control that Tail Beacon X. Very low power. It runs on 3 watts of power, and that is a 250 watt Mode S transponder with ADS-B out and the nav light and everything else. So pretty incredible what it does in the minimal amount of power it uses. So quickly, just as you can see on this slide, the wingtip and the tail marker lights, those are prime examples for what your nav light would be for Sky Beacon or Tail Beacon X. I didn't have time to find a Stinson picture, so I do apologize. This is a Sonics image that I already had and grabbed. So as for installing certified ADS-B, this kind of wraps it up on the ADS-B side. Is it does need to be installed by an A&P, and IA signs off on the 337 form. If you've got a good connection with an IA, they will typically allow you to do the install, but they're going to have to be the one who signs off on it and sends the 337 form in. We have a qualified installer program that if you don't have anybody you could reach out to, they're more than happy to take and help. Um, Moving on to the AV panel displays, this is really where the new product post 2020 is really driven, and we are shipping a ton of them right now. So it's been very well received. The AV30C, this product is available in certified and experimental products, heavily geared towards, again, the certified. And so AV30C is a 3-inch EFIS. The AV20 is it's essentially, it's a multifunction display. Your AV30 is currently STC'd and approved for a primary digital attitude indicator and a directional gyro, as well as a slip indicator. Every other one of the functions that you see here is the rest of those functions are supplemental awareness, essentially meaning the AV30C can go in to replace your attitude indicator, artificial horizon, or your directional gyro. It cannot replace your airspeed indicator, your altimeter, your if you've got an IFR HSI, cannot replace those. It is, in fact, a primary replacement for your attitude indicator and directional gyro. So it fits into the 3-inch slot. There is no cutting or anything to replace any panels. You'll see how thin it is in the next couple slides. The AV20 is a 12-in-1 display. I'm not going to go into all the kind of marketing stuff and the hype here. It is a approved VFR and IFR digital clock. For $895, this little baby is it's very bright. It gives you an attitude indicator. You've got an angle of attack, and the clock function alone, it has timers, Zulu time. It's got your count up, count down. It's got a flight timer and an engine timer. So there's a lot of adjustability in there and multiple functions. I'll get into a little bit more after this as well. So just to touch base real quick on the AV30C key features. Again, attitude indicator, it is a non-slave DG, not to be confused with a magnetic compass. When you get in this, you do have to set it to your heading, like a whiskey or a liquid compass, runway heading. You do have to set it. That's non-slaved. The probeless angle of attack, it has the bus voltage meter, a G meter. You've got a bank angle, indicated airspeed, pressure, altitude, and apologize that every once in a while I see a new joining member. So vertical trend, it's got vertical speed. It also controls the tail beacon X, which we'll show a little bit here later. You can, with an optional outside air temperature probe, it will give you density, altitude, true airspeed, and then a new function that's out there for the experimental is with our AV Link. It actually has a traffic display screen that will be certified. There will be an AV Link STC, and that will pass in the traffic information into the AV30. Small screen, but on AV30 and AV Link, I'll get into a little bit more information here. Pretty exciting product. And then autopilot integration is in the works. TrueTrack and Aero Cruise is a digital autopilot. That is the first round that will probably be released here shortly. And then the legacy autopilots, S-Tech, Sentry, that will have to have a module that they're working on right now, getting certified. It's been very painfully slow. I do apologize, but it is coming. The top 2 features that we're driving right now in certification is the autopilot integration and the IFR HSI. Beyond that, we get into some twins and some additional functions. So again, not to rehash this, but these are your primary replacements that you can replace. Your primary DG, your primary attitude indicator, and then you do get a bonus nav data screen if you feed a GPS into it. If you've got a portable, a panel GPS, the AV30 actually does end up accepting what's called the NMEA data and the aviation format. Those are your most common GPS sentences. And so with that, you get your flight plan legs, waypoints, you get some integration into the panels, and then obviously, you get a GPS nav track, and you also get your GPS altitude and your GPS ground speed. So a lot of additional information there when you do tie in a GPS into the AV30. So also just to toggle between these modes, it's a long press on the center knob. There's only 3 buttons on the AV30. So you have a left button, which is menu, and it toggles you through the different menus. The center button is what you use to set your Colesman, your Barrow. You use it to set your DG, to set the DG heading bug. And then you long press it for 2+ seconds and release it, and it toggles over to the next function. So for instance, you can go from the DG to the attitude indicator, and then the next one would be the traffic screen that you can get to. And one AV30 is capable of running all 3 functions at the, as you toggle them. It's not like it's only going to run one like a competitor G5 or 275 where you have to buy it specific to the instrument. All those functions are running at the same time. You're just using the center button to toggle between, modes, if you will. So in summary, the AV30C, you get a lot more features. It's less money. There's hardly any install. The minimum installation on AV30 is power, ground, plummet into the pitot-static. And on the back, you'll see here in the next slide, it's just the quick connect press in features for the air data. You do get to keep the classic look. Many on this call with Stinsons, we've got these in a lot of vintage aircraft. You're only going to see the round portion. You're not going to see, obviously, the screw holes and portions. So when that unit's on, it looks like a photorealistic instrument. And then when you turn it off and it's sitting on display, if you've got a show plane or something like that, when you turn it off, that screen's black. Nobody really has, none the better to tell that it's, it doesn't look out of place with a vintage aircraft. We even have some skins on the AV30 that you can go from a high visibility EFIS. You can go to this, what you see on the screen is the legacy. It's kind of the photorealism. And then there's a vintage, which kind of grayscales it. It's not really a sepia tone, but it kind of grayscales it, takes it down, and kind of fits those, pre-60, aircraft, and makes it look a little bit more in tune with the rest of the panel. Pretty cool stuff. So again, the AV30 in experimentals, $1,595, certified is $1,995, and at the end we'll get into a few specials we have right now. So here's a picture of the back of the AV30. You can see it's 2 inches thin. You basically have a pitot-static port that you just press in and it connects in. There's one 15-pin connector. Minimum, again, is power and ground on there. And then what you see on the back with the 2 screws, that is a battery. It's user replaceable. This is a battery. The continued airworthiness is not like, again, some of the competitors where every 2 years you have to replace a $250, $270 battery. The AV30, every 2 years you do a 2-hour battery test. This battery recharges as you're flying. And when you do that self-test, if it holds 2 hours, keep on flying. Our battery is right now, we've not sold any batteries, but the target price on the battery is between $50 and $75. So you can get the ideal right there, very affordable. Again, we're the company that's trying to look out for the the pilot and the aircraft owner. So, excuse me. So here, just to touch on a couple of these things, GPS integration. There's no required magnetometer or GPS to install. Again, it's non-slaved. I will get into a little bit on the magnetometer and GPS here in a second. There are no wires to run between units or anything like that. If you put in an attitude indicator and a directional gyro, you can remove your vacuum pump. That is the most affordable way to do this. You put one AV30 in for the AI, one in for the DG. The mechanic does the 337 form to remove the vacuum pump. And if you have that dry vane vacuum pump, you don't really have to ever worry about that failing again. Again, field replaceable battery built into it. This is the GPF nav data screen. Again, there's a couple different screens you can see where you get an arc map and you get the, we call it a GPS HSI for a lot of guys out there have been flying a long time. It's really a CDI, I mean, with the compass around it. So it does not give you vertical guidance. It's going to give you the horizontal, but it will not give you glide slope, ILS or vertical guidance. It is essentially your horizontal guidance for a GPS HSI. Again, you can slave it to the GPS when you do this. All of the data fields that you see in here are customizable. If you wanted the distance on the left and the waypoint on the right, you can change those around however you want. Everything in the AV30 is really customizable. You can remove those data fields if you want it clean and decluttered, or you can add them back in and kind of pick and choose where you want them. We even have different fonts. If you like a digital font or you like the traditional kind of Arial font like this, most people keep it the way this one is right here. So there are alerting features. If you plumb in the audio to an intercom or an audio panel, you'll get the angle of attack alerting, G-limit alerting, excessive roll. All of those are adjustable when they go on. You do get the visible alert on the screen, which you see the G-limit right on the center of the screen, and you get the audible alerts in your intercom or audio. The AV30 does not have a speaker, so it won't have its own audible output, but the volume is adjustable. There is an internal adjustability so that you can make it kind of mesh up with your intercoms as well. So for those that are interested in the AV30 as a transponder control with Tailbeacon X, you can kind of see right here, this is what the AV30 screen is. For anybody who's been flying and reached over and changed a radio or a squawk and you look back up and you're drifting one way or another, this is an active attitude indicator as you're changing. So as you're dialing your squawk, you're looking at the actual horizon on the screens. You can set the registration and ID information in the AV30. It's got your squawk. You can change the mode. It has a shortcut, which you don't see on here, but you can see a shortcut that, the ident there gives the GPS levels. So you know that you're receiving good GPS, and then you have a status here as well. Very simple and easy to use. Basically, when you're in this mode, you would, for instance, if you're an attitude indicator or the DG mode, you just right press this right button here, the view button, and that will get you to the AV30 transponder control screen. Then you press the center button, the squawk pops up, and then you basically rotate right or left to change the digit and value. And then once you're done, you'll hit the left button and you're done and squawk's over. So it is a single knob entry for a squawk, but it's common to a lot of units out there that are this same form factor. So again, AV30C is, this kind of talks to the AV Link. It's kind of powered for, integration. And I want to talk a little bit about this because the AV Link, it is Wi-Fi. It auto connects to any of the GDL90 ADSB receivers. So if you've got a Stratus 3, a Sentry, Sentry Mini, if you've got a flight box, the Dynon DRX, even some of the panel models out there, the Avidynes, the standard Wi-Fi ADSB, AV-Link will automatically connect to, and it will show the display of the traffic on the screen. What's coming, and very exciting, is many of the EFBs like ForeFlight and iFly GPS and FlyQ, we're starting to integrate where our AHARS data, our pedostatic airspeed and pressure altitude data, all of that information that's in the AV30 would be able to be passed out through AV-Link into the iPad. So it really becomes a extension of your panel. And a lot of people, well, that's cool, but what does that really mean? What a lot of people don't understand is when you're looking at traffic on your iPad, you're looking at GPS traffic on the iPad for you, and then all of the other traffic out there is pressure altitude. So there is a multi-100-foot discrepancy built into their traffic reporting. If we get our pressure altitude over to the iPad, whatever app you're using, now that relative traffic altitude it's using pressure altitude versus pressure altitude, and it's always going to be much more accurate. So it's a huge safety benefit, but that's getting data out of the AV30 into the AV-Link. We want to also get data into the AV30. So for instance, what's also in the works is if you use, an iPad with ForeFlight or, an Android with, AvAir, whatever the case is, those EFBs will have the ability to then pass that flight plan data into the AV30 and then drive that HSI that I was showing you earlier. So you actually have a heading bug right there on the screen. Instead of staring at a screen all the time looking at your flight, you can just make sure you're on track with the CDI on the screen and then focus on the iPad for picking out traffic and things like that and so forth. So a lot of cool information coming. AV-Link really bridges the panel with the pilot, the portables, if you will. So again, I think I've covered that. And then here's AV-Link, so you can actually see a little bit more representation of it. It plugs right into the back. So for instance, the DB15 plug would unplug from the AV30. This gets inserted into the AV-Link or into the AV30, and then the DB15 plug plugs back into it. So there's no wiring. It's literally, it's unplug, plug, and play. And right now, the AV-Link is $299 for experimental, and then the certified, it's probably going to be in the $349 range is what we're targeting for. But again, it will get additional functions and features. And as you can see, there's again, a little traffic display down there. That is a scalable traffic screen. So as you rotate the dial, you can zoom in and zoom out. If you press the center button, you can rotate and select the traffic and get more information on that traffic. So, for a small 3-inch display, it's pretty powerful. Again, it shows the color displays. It's hard to see on this, but traffic that's far away, it's the aqua color. As it gets closer, gets to an alert status, it turns yellow and it will go red as well. So you do get the alerting colorations on the traffic targets as well. So here you can kind of see in selecting one of those targets, you actually get a distance, their altitude, their speed, what class aircraft they are, and then you get their call sign. So pretty cool. It highlights it on the screen as well, so you know which one you're looking at. And then as you rotate that around, it'll basically pop each one and refresh the data up at the top. So next we'll just move on to the AV20, and I'll get some questions on this later on at the end of this. But AV20, it is a 12-in-1 multifunction display. It is an FAA approved VFR and IFR clock replacement. And then it's NORCE approved for about 12 other functions, from transponder control to attitude indicator. It's got an angle of attack. It's got right here, you can see a G meter. It's got a slip skid indicator. Here's your clocks, timers, bus voltage. It has an engine run timer, flight timer. Again, you have to have the pedostatic connected for the flight timer because it triggers it at 35 knots is when it triggers it. And so density, altitude, and true airspeed, again, those are required to have the OAT probe connected to it. So again, Same thing here, AV20, very small. It's less than 2 inches thick. This is the quick connect pitot-static, and it's only a DB9. So very, very simple installation. Again, most people power ground, pitot-static, and then again, it's got the built-in battery. It is a 30-minute battery. It is replaceable. Basically, these screws come off, and then the battery is inside. Again, it's just a plug and play battery replacement. So, not to rehash this, but it's a simple A&P logbook entry. It doesn't have to have a 337 or have an IA sign off on it. An A&P can install this, sign it off on the logbook, and you're done. 2 to 4 hours. I'm going to be honest with you, very generous on time. I put 2 AV30s and 1 AV20 in, and it took me 2.5 hours to do all 3. Now, I did just pitot-static power ground on all of them, but it's a very simple and easy install. These both AV30 and AV20 are extremely bright in the cockpit, but they also, I've been around the industry a long time, and one of the big things that's frustrating is the power, the brightness when you're flying at night. It's still very bright and almost blinds, it causes, bright spots. These instruments get so dim that you can barely see them in daylight. They look like they're off, but inside the cockpit at night, they are perfect. You can see everything exactly how you want. It is also very slow reacting to light. So if you hit it with a flashlight, it's not going to burst up real bright and go back down. It takes, a good minute or so for it to make the full swath of power, of brightness. So again, it's one of the best I've seen, and I've come around from a long time on flying, and that's one of the reasons why when it came up and we looked at this company and product to buy, I was one of the first ones to fly it, and it was like, this is a winner. So anyways, so next, last but not least, and probably the next biggest, is space-based ADS-B. It's not required here in the United States. If anybody flies in Canada, they know Ariane and the space-based ADS-B. This is Tail Beacon X, and I don't want to scare anybody, but it's probably a fairly likelihood that in the years to come, we'll see this happen in the United States. I don't think it's anytime soon. Canada, Europe, Australia, many other areas are now starting to lock on to the space-based ADS-B. When that happens, obviously, we'll probably be looking at another mandate. I hope it's not, but it is pretty cool. The Tail Beacon X, it has an integrated GPS. It is the Mode S transponder, 250 full watts. And it is Ariane compatible, which means it meets the diversity performance. It is not a diversity system, and I'll kind of explain that here in a second. And then the LED nav lighting, it's again kind of one of the cores of our product. Just to kind of give you an idea here on this, most non-diversity transponders are in the $2,700 to $5,500, and that's kind of your Apario ES, the Stratus ESG, up to, call it the 345 and the NGT 9000. Now, when you go into the diversity, where a diversity system has upper and lower antennas and alternates, that right there, the base level basically starts at about $6,500 plus the GPS, and then pretty extensive install, all the way up to about $8,000 plus GPS and install. The Tail Beacon X, minimal install and $24.99. So if diversity happens here in the United States, Tail Beacon X is by far the long shot winner for affordability and performance. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of an overview here. So if you had an AV30 in the plane, you have 2 wires that run to the Tail Beacon X in the back, uses the existing power ground. And right there on the tail, that's all you have, 2 units, no antennas, no GPS modules, or all the additional wiring and stuff like that. Down on the bottom, you can see the traditional diversity style antenna, or antenna, where you have an upper and lower and a GPS antenna and a transponder. What's not on there is you also have a blind encoder that's built into the plane, that's installed into the plane as well. With Tailbeacon X, you have no blind altitude encoder. It's built into the AV30 and the Tailbeacon X. So again, not to rehash this on the cost, but very low cost, from $24.99 to about $8,000. Time, you're talking a minimum hour and a couple hours install. They will have to run the twisted shielded pair from the panel to the tail, and generally that's about a 4 to 5 hour minimal that most shops are going to charge. That's based on a $100 rate and $100 an hour rate. We've heard diversity transponders labor running into the 8,000 mark. So you can back that over to the $7,000 price tag. It's not uncommon to get $12,000 to $14,000 for an installed diversity system. So between you and me all on this call, let's hope and pray that does not happen here in the United States. Not for the pilot side, but I think hopefully with ADS-B and the equipment we have now, we'll be here for a while. So again, minimal downtime. Here we've got a couple bundle and save opportunities with Tailbeacon X. If you buy an AV30 with it, you actually get a $300 break on the AV30, makes it $1,695. Experimental is not really relative here for the company, but we do have a 2-inch AV22 unit that is coming out soon. I actually just was in a meeting today. They've got the prototypes ready to go. They're doing the final testing, and so hopefully we'll see that launched here before long. And that's just a lower cost 2-inch transponder only display. Doesn't have all of the AV30 features. It will be a transponder control head with a basically a clock and timer is what we're basically doing there. So very minimal cost on that. It would probably be in this $500 to $700 range for a control head clock timer combination. So again, everything is at UAvionix and our resellers. I guess before I go into the questions here, I did want to kind of touch base with anybody and everybody. So the AV30, something that's happened since here in the last, probably two weeks, is we got a service bulletin approved for anybody that's had any conversations about the AV30 having a drift or precession DG performance situation. This service bulletin is a software update. It resolves that. And then also every unit that we've been shipping for the past probably several months has a internal sensor, magnetic sensor. So all AV30s right now ship with a magnetic sensor, not to be confused necessarily with a magnetometer. Because the AV30 is non-slaved, you still have to get into it and set it to the DG, set it to the compass heading, but it has that internal magnetic sensor for accuracy reference. So if you're flying and there's vibrations and things like that that are happening, all of a sudden the AV30, the software senses, hey, we're starting to, we can see a movement in accuracy. It's got a magnetic reference that it will pull it back over. Part of that is because it is certified as a non-slaved device. It won't drive, the magnetometer won't drive the DG. It's just a accuracy reference to pull it back over. But again, this software bulletin that we've got, it's field updatable, super easy. It's it fixes the DG performance. It adds a vibration monitor. And I'll touch base on this real quick, and then we'll open it up to questions. But this vibration monitor, some aircraft, if in the install a screw or a panel is loose, helps identify large vibration that's beyond kind of an allowable threshold. many of the competitor and EFIS models out there have something similar, but there's also a really cool aspect. We've seen this happen in quite a few times actually, where they did this vibration monitor on the AV30, and it did go above the limits. And what they ended up finding is a couple of them, it was rubbing on the back of the panel, but on several of them, they had a Dynavibe to get their propeller balanced, and all of the performance issues went away. But they actually saved their engine on that vibration, because, you know, if you spend a couple $100 or so on a vibration balance versus, you know, years down the road with engine wear, tens of thousands of dollars on an engine rebuild due to vibration. So we're pretty excited about this. Positive feedback has been amazing on it right now, and I guess with that, I'll open it up with any questions and figure out how to move this back over to Will for the hosting.
Yeah, I tell you what, Shane, Sean, I'm driving, so I might just leave you as the host. But I think I've asked everybody to unmute if they want to ask questions.
Okay, yeah, let me see if I can go in here and unmute all here. Let's see. It is, let me stop sharing my screen, and it will put me back over here, and then unmute all.
Shane, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
All right. Hey, while you're doing that, I do have a question for you.
Yes.
So on the Tail Beacon X, you know how on a traditional transponder you have to go get that recertified every couple of years to get into Class Bravo airspace. Will that be the same case under the Tail Beacon X?
Yes, yeah. All Mode C and Mode S transponders will still have to have the 24-month bench test, if you will.
Okay.
Bob Postel with a follow-on question to that, if I might. How would the Mode S transponder built into the tail beacon be testable in that the test equipment plugs into the altitude sensor, and they generate an altitude that way to have the thing send on while they're testing it? You guys, is there a port they can plug into on the Sky Beacon, Tail Beacon? So
they would plug into the back of the AV30. So on the AV30, it can do it, but there's also a test. Basically, and I don't want to go too much into this because I'm probably not the right person to ask, but there is a coupling where they can actually, there's a coupling device that when they do that testing, they can actually take and test that unit and drive it all the way up to max altitude and bring it back down. But because it has to be done at lower power, you know, it actually would couple over the device. But yeah, they can actually do that and drive it with the AV30.
Okay, if I could, as long as I have the floor, I have an AV30 that's been in the plane for a few weeks and I love it, but I was surprised at how rapidly the DG precesses. So I'm glad to hear you have a fix. I'll have to look that up. But I do have one comment / question. In putting the AV30 into my panel, as Shane, as you may or may not know, all of us know, the Stinson panel, assuming it's still stock, some people have put in a flat replacement panel, but the normal panel has an underlaying area that's the actual flat panel you install the instruments in and put screws through to mount the instruments. And then there's a overlay, kind of Art Deco looking overlay, beautiful formed piece with little dimpled in corner edges around the holes for the instruments. And yes. I had to file out semicircular areas in order to have access to the main push button and to the two smaller buttons. And also on the left had to include an opened up area so that the light sensor for the automatic brightness and dimness of the screen would have access to the outside world. That cosmetic overlay obscures those things and blocks them. And as part of that, to finish my question, that's just an installation issue. It requires grimacing and filing your antique airplane's beautiful formed panel overlay in order to let those functions come through physically. Because the panel overlay sticks out from what normally would be the face of the instrument panel, it's tough reaching the little bit of the center knob that you can reach on an AV30 when installed in a Stinson with that overlay panel. Is it possible to have an optional longer knob that would have a little more to grip?
Yeah, so that's actually come up once before. I actually made a recommendation that maybe there is an option for a longer, or even, for lack of better terms, even a an extender that goes on the end of it, because I'm in a 68 172, and it has a very similar plastic overlay, obviously not as beautiful as what the Stinsons are, but it has that molded plastic overlay that goes on, and it sticks off the panel, I guess, off of the instrument about maybe a half inch, a little bit less than a half inch. It's not hindering for me, but I did mention it. So they are looking into it, potentially to even maybe do a longer knob. I really don't have a date on that. The knob, it does come off and on. It's essentially that knob just goes on and it glues on, so it can come off. But I've even had that idea of, like you say, if something, was almost a sleeve that went over it and was an extended to come off. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
But it's definitely on the watch list.
Okay, and I will say it's a fabulous unit, the AV30. I'm not trying to sell them to you guys or anyone else, but I should say in the 3 weeks I've had it, I think I've probably indirectly sold 5 of them already. People see it and go, wow, I got to get me one of those.
Yeah,
it's
I'll
shut up now and everyone else talk.
Yeah, it's pretty cool in the fact that a lot of the competitor units, they have the 3-inch display, but a lot of the a lot of them are the heading tape, the airspeed, and the altitude tape. There's a lot of stuff happening on it, and as you saw on the AV30, there's a lot of information on it, but because it's static in location, it's easier to get the information in and out, and you can get, it's, again, in my plane, I've got one AV30 for the attitude, one AV30 for the DG, and those have become really my 2 go-to instruments. In 35 years of looking around, I still look, make sure everything's there, but I can look at that and I can just bounce across it, and I can get my vertical speed, vertical trend. I've got my programmed V-speed arc in there. I've got my airspeed, my altitude, and for me, a VFR pilot, I get to glance at it, get everything, and get my eyes back outside the plane. I was always taught fly with your eyes outside the plane and feel the plane rather than, head down buried into an iPad. So,
Shane, Richard Rogers, I've got a couple of questions on AV30, but first I'll make a couple of comments. I've got both the Sky Beacon and the Sky Sensor, and I've just been very, very pleased with them. So
awesome.
I want to let you know that. You answered a question I had about the DG. I'm looking at putting a couple of these units in my airplane. I've been flying EFIS since '84, and you can see my panel behind me here. I would kind of like to have your technology in there. One question was, I was told that this is, I don't see it on your side, but this is VFR only. And it seems to me that maybe that's a misunderstanding, because you don't have
it is, yeah. It is approved for a VFR and IFR attitude indicator, directional gyro, and slip indicator. It's not approved for an IFR HSI.
Right.
But if you have an attitude indicator or a directional gyro, and you're directly replacing those, it's VFR and IFR, yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. It was an error on the other person's part, and I want to clarify that. Now, when you get the HSI, is that anticipated to be a software upgrade for those of us who would have the VFR or have the nav data only without vertical guidance?
So the nav data right now, if you plumb in, for instance, if you pipe in the serial wire from a portable, I mean, it could be a Garmin 660, it could be an iFly 740, it could be a Garmin 430W, and you can plumb that serial plug or wire into the AV30. That's already in it. It will take the GPS data, show you the HSI horizontal guidance. When we do the IFR HSI that gets the vertical component with the glide slope and ILS, that will be a module, because for instance, the 430 or 530 or GNS 650, et cetera, that's going to pipe in what's called the AirInc 429 data. That's where the vertical guidance is. And the AV30 does not have the 429 port in it. So the module will actually, they're looking at right now. So for instance, you saw AV-Link, it's essentially a plug and play. So they're looking at making possibly a harness style that would give the port for the 429. And so we need to be able to get that AirInc 429 into the AV30. So there will be software, but there will also be a little small modular solution that goes into the back. The current AV30s will support it when that's added, but it will be that little AirInc 429 module.
That's really what I wanted to know. In other words, we don't have to junk the unit.
That's right.
Be able to upgrade the unit. It won't be only software.
Yeah.
Will you be able to have an external switch or something so you can run, say, an ILS from a Navcom, and then a guidance from a IFR GPS? So
yes, my understanding, you'd be able to switch that from an external switch, so like either a nav or a com or GPS, GNSS. So that's my understanding.
It'll be like any other HSI. You can have multiple sources. All right. One other question then. If you get the outside air temperature probe, will that one probe will serve both an AV or maybe two AV30s and an AV20?
That's the great question, because that's kind of the official answer from Davtron, because we use the Davtron probe. The official answer is it should be one probe per device. The unofficial from the field is it's a serial plug and it's an analog device. So are there people using one probe to feed two devices? Absolutely. Does it work? It does, but that's not the official, Davtron obviously. There's other probes that can work for it. There's a special codex that's for the probe. But the risk is kind of like with a serial, depending upon how far that probe is away from the panel, the longer the cable, you can get the attenuation of that serial connection, and the temperature could read slightly off. What's cool about the AV30 is for the attitude, for the trim, for the outside air temperature, for the barrow, all of those have fine-tuning trims. So if you put in an OAT probe and you're seeing it's feeding this, but the other one is slightly off, well, that's probably a little bit of signal degradation over the run, and you can dial it in and correct it, if you will. Same thing with airspeed. Go ahead.
Frankly, if you have the temperature probe into, say, an AV30 to give you density, altitude, true airspeed, and so on, probably you're not going to need those functions over on an AV20 anyway, and you'll just use the other function. You won't be using those functions. What you'd like to have maybe is the angle of attack and the timers and so on. Okay. Well, I thank you very much. I had been looking at this, and then they said, well, it's VFR only, and that I've got I don't know if you can see, I've got a attitude indicator, directional gyro now.
Yep.
They're electric, so I don't have to worry about the vacuum, but one of these days they're going to go bad, and I'd rather have the other display. But I don't have the certified IFR right now, but I have had in the past, and
right.
I wanted that, so I wouldn't lose that. But then they were saying, well, look at the G5, or look at the GI 275, or look at Aspen. But there's problems with all of that stuff, and this just looks like, I think, is the bargain price still available till the end of November on these things?
So good. So right now on the AV30, we have buy two AV30s and you get a $400 rebate on it. That is good until the end of November. If you do two AV30s and one AV20, you get a $500 rebate. Those are Visa gift card rebates. They do run until the end of November, but if nobody on here promises if everybody promises not to let it beyond this meeting, I have it pretty good indication that it might nudge into the December timeframe. There will probably be a little announcement come towards the end of November that we're going to extend it. It's been hugely successful, and I've kind of leveraged it with it because we actually, up until this point, we've had a tremendous challenge with getting components. Everybody's probably heard the supply chain semiconductor issues, and we make everything here in the United States, but a lot of those little small microprocessors and chip components, they come from all over the world, and so we're not excused from what everybody else is experiencing. But we bought heavily, and for no pun intended, the ship has come in, and we have a lot of units they're building, and many of our competitors don't have components and can't build. So we're driving this rebate internationally, and we're going to run it hard to try and capture as much as that as we can. And quite honestly, my core driver is to save pilots like yourself and me as much as possible during these times.
Well, Merry Christmas to me. This is going to be an expensive Zoom call, I guess, but I'll get in on that deal. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Richard, I put an order in last week, so I know the feeling there, but I'm looking forward to putting them in the plane.
Well, I'm kind of curious, to the person who was talking about, I think it was Bob, to the person who was talking about it with the knob. I don't know if you'll be able to see, but I have one here. It may be blurry, but this bottom portion where the two buttons and the knob are, does your instrument, it covers that? It's not the full 360-degree hole like I was seeing on, I think, Richard's. Oh, you're muted, Bob.
Oh, okay, I'm on now. It doesn't cover the decorative overlay. Overlaps the very outer edge of the instrument, and it does this to all the instruments in the panel, but it is a full circle. However, because it overlaps the edge of the instrument, that means that about half of the little push buttons, the ones on each side, are covered. You can still operate them without removing a half moon of overlay. However, it physically conflicts with the knob. You must remove a half moon where the knob is. I think I see.
Yeah, I see what you're talking about. You probably only had to shave maybe an eighth or a quarter, less than a quarter inch off of it or so to make it cover.
For the two small knobs, and on the left side for making sure that the brightness sensor had a good view of the world. Yeah, 1/8 inch, quarter inch, something like that.
Okay.
To clear the size of the shaft of the knob, I had to pretty much remove the entire beveled in section out to the flat part of the overlay, but then the knob sits in that half moon pretty nicely.
Okay. And I'm just curious on that, see if there's anything. Unfortunately, on those knobs, I don't foresee them moving any time on that. So I think,
as far as I don't think we need to move the knob. I hated to file half moons into my beautiful cover, but it's what it took to get the thing in there. But I'd just love to have a knob that sticks out a little further from the instrument so I can grip it. Right now, it's so close to the knob, and the surface of the cosmetic overlay are close to each other. So I'm working with the last little bit of the knob just with the tips of my fingers.
I hear you.
It's a great installation. I'm very happy with it. And the chap wondering about the display for navigation, I have my little iFly GPS 740 portable unit with a plugged in umbilical coming out of it, their serial adapter, and have it feeding data to the thing, and it shows the GPS data on that HSI just beautifully. Looks like, I should mention, I've been flying 53 years, and much of that was in the Air Force and then an airline. Right now, between the iFly GPS 740B in the corner of the panel on a bracket and that AV30, I have more information in front of me than when I was flying a 4-engine Air Force jet all over the world in the 70s. It's amazing.
I love hearing that, because those are two kinds. So UAvionix, to anybody that isn't familiar with me or anything like that, I came from the iFly GPS world. When I ran that company for Walter for 7 years, and UAvionix hired me away, but I stay very contacted with Walter and the iFly team. So I love hearing that, because that's, when I came on with UAvionix, that's one of the things that I said is, listen, this is a very tight-knit community of pilots, and we're pilots, these are our fellow pilots, so we have to make sure that we take care of everybody and treat them like ourselves, we would want to be treated. And so I told them, this is a company that can do very well by the pilots, but you cannot replace pilot referrals, because once you, for instance, you talk about it and you like the product, you tell all your pilot buddies, and it's just a core business that I've tried to be part of all the time, and that was one of the key driving factors for me coming over. So that's good to hear.
I have a question to just continue the question, Bob's question about, and comments about the knobs and buttons. You said that the knob can pull off, and can the buttons also pull off? Could I potentially have a machinist make me some extensions or alternate buttons?
No, it doesn't. The knob doesn't pull off. I'm sorry, the buttons don't pull off. They're actually in from the back. It could possibly be a situation if we could get a longer, deeper button that, that front bezel comes off, and then the new buttons, slip in there and could give a longer button. But yeah, those little buttons, they're in from the back, so they're not going to come out.
So I've installed a few. I work at a shop. I've installed a few JPI units, including in some Cessnas that have the plastic panel like you were talking about.
Right.
And I ended up drilling out the shank of a rivet, actually, to make some little extensions for the JPI unit to extend through that. So, I still think that, there are possibilities for people that have decorative overlays on panels to make them work.
Yeah.
But
no, I agree.
Thanks for answering that.
Oh, no problem. I saw one chat message here. I don't know if it got to it. I want to answer it real quick. I saw, can you use the panel light dimmer switch to control the AV30 brightness? So just so anybody understands, the AV30, the right button, when you look at the screen, and you probably can't see it on here, but this bottom right button, it looks like it's blurred, I'm sorry, but that bottom right button, it says hold BRT. And if you press and hold that, you have an option of manually adjusting the brightness, or you can turn it to auto bright, so it will automatically adjust. And so you do have an auto bright, and you have a manual adjustability. So just wanted to answer that question.
And I will say that the auto bright function works beautifully. It seems to work just fine with our panel and our cockpit environment.
Yeah, and that's what I found too.
Yeah, and as far as the little buttons on each side, no problem operating them with our overlay. It's only that center button where it's kind of awkward, the center knob. It's just hard getting a good grip on the knob and turning it without accidentally also pushing it, which takes it away from the function you're trying to adjust by turning it.
So it seems like you could probably turn something on a lathe and put a little set screw in it and make a little overlay extender fairly easily.
Yeah,
that
I
might
mean, if you
might fix
if you
that.
didn't mind ugliness, you could take a piece of thin diameter flexible hose that had the right ID and just wedge it on there, and that would turn the knob just
I've-
fine, but it'd be ugly.
I've had people do that. I've actually had some people take like I know this sounds a little, I wouldn't want to do it necessarily in a show plane or something like that, but I've had people say that they took like a Bic or a Sharpie pin cap and push it on the end, and that gives them, you know, a long extension. I'm like, hey, listen, we're pilots, so we come up with all kinds of different stuff on it. But yeah, it's I'll definitely report that back as coming off of this call and see if there's something we can come up with, because I think there's probably a pretty simple, maybe even like a little silicone sleeve that could go on and give a little bit of an extension. So I'll see if I can pass that along.
I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes, sir.
Oh, okay. I have a question on the sky sensor. You still bake them?
We do, yes.
You didn't mention it. I got a sky beacon on mine, and I had a problem with the strobes are breaking squelch on the radio. I know that's been a problem with some other people, and I wanted to install a sky sensor, and wondering with the two of them going, if I'm going to have a problem with the squelch control on the radio.
So my understanding, and again, my understanding is there is a capacitor that you can get to put on the strobe wire or the ground of the sky sensor or the sky beacon that will filter that noise. I don't have it here specifically what the frequency is, but our support team, I can get that and probably get back to Jody, or if you want to send an email to Shane at UAvionix, I can get that information. But we have seen on some cases that strobe will break squelch. You know, it's an LED strobe, so sometimes different airplanes have different kind of linear style interference, and there's a noise cap that you can put on there that will kind of filter that out. And I can get that information to you.
Okay, I'll contact you.
I've had that. I didn't have that with my sky sensor. Later, I added this, or sky beacon. Later, I added the sky sensor, and I have it intermittently on different frequencies. And so I'm going to have to put this filter on, but it didn't happen with my sky beacon. So it may be that your sky sensor won't do it. It might or might not. Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of sky sensors that are on planes out there, and it's pretty minimal. We don't hear it a lot. I would say first, double check your ground. From what I've heard is a lot of times, if the ground has got a weak ground, it will make that noise and find it through the ground and backfeed into the aircraft. So you might just double check and make sure you've got a really good mechanical crimp on it, that if it's screwed in, like on my Cessna, it screws into the metal end of the wingtip, just make sure that ground, if it's on the airframe out there, make sure it's got a good connection. If it tracks back into the inside of the airplane into a grounding point, it's probably not an issue. It's with the ground, but with many of the control surfaces and the ground being to a spar or a rib out there, an aircraft, just make sure it's got a really good, ground connection point.
Yeah, I actually, on my airplane, I pulled new wires through with the shielded, dedicated ground, shielded wire twisted, and it's still, occasionally I still get on certain frequencies, I'll still break squelch.
Gotcha.
I'm just wondering if that's going to happen twice as bad with two strobes.
No. So what's interesting is what you're probably hearing on the sky beacon. There may be something out there, because keep in mind, tail beacon, when if you're hearing a pop, like if it's a break like every second when it does it, that's actually a transmission break. So it's bursting 25 watts from that tail beacon out, and potentially there's a wire or a ground or something that could be feeding back into the electrical system through your intercom or radio, etc. The sky sensor is a little bit different. It's this strobe. I don't know why we've not heard really strobe noise on the Sky Beacon, but we have heard a few of them on the Sky Sensor. Sky Sensor also has the Wi-Fi going all the time. The Sky Beacon, when you go airborne, it kills the Wi-Fi. So there's a little bit more going on in Sky Sensor. Again, I know this filter noise cap, a couple different things their support team have to help resolve that. So I saw another email pop up here with the AV30 and Tail Beacon X. Do you still need an encoder, or is it built into the Tail Beacon X? Yeah, so the Tail Beacon X has a built-in altitude encoder in it. The AV30 also has an altitude encoder in it. So you have redundant encoders with an AV30 and a Tail Beacon X. The way that it's designed to work is it will actually use the encoder for the AV30 because that's tied into your pitot-static system. So it's going to use the initial altitude encoder off the AV30 that's using the same pitot-static that's driving everything else in the plane. In the event that something fails there, the Tail Beacon X has its own internal encoder that it can fall back on if it needs to and report. So again, there's built-in redundancy. So hopefully that answers the question. But if you have, for instance, if you have a Garmin 327 or a Bendix King KT7068, those are some of the most common transponders out there with an ACK transponder or a Transcal transponder, a Transcal altitude encoder. So what that does is it will, you can eliminate that encoder and eliminate that transponder. The AV30 and the Tail Beacon X, that's all you need with power ground, pitot-static on the AV30, power ground on the Tail Beacon X, and then a twisted pair run between them, and that's it.
That's great. Thanks, Sean. I'm rebuilding a panel from nothing, so I just wanted to know exactly what pieces were needed. Thank you.
Yeah. No, AV30 and Tail Beacon X, and that is your essential. Here's the cool thing is if you got an attitude indicator or a DG that's going out, you replace it. That takes care of replacing your attitude or DG, and then you got the Tail Beacon X for $24.99, and that is your Mode S transponder with ADSB out. And what I was going to say on the diversity, I didn't catch it on the slide, is a typical diversity system. It transmits, so 978 UAT transmits all of its data in 1 second. It can send 48 bits of data in 1 second. So a full data package is about 45 to 46 bits of data. So it can send everything in 1 second. The Mode S, it can only send 24 bits of data in a second. So it takes 2 seconds to get the full data package out to ATC. So on a diversity system, it's got 1 second, 2 second to the up, 1 second, 2 second to the bottom. So it's a 4-second cycle up and down. Tail Beacon X, it's 1 second, 2 seconds up and down at the same time. Because it's the way that antenna is patented is that dipole antenna on the optimal spot of the wingtip. There will be a Sky Beacon X and Tail Beacon X. The way it's designed and patented is that antenna is bursting in a cardioid pattern that's hitting the sky satellites and the ground-based at the same time. So it's really better than diversity because you're getting full data package every 2 seconds instead of 2 up, 2 down, 2 up, 2 down, and basically your satellite system being every 4 seconds. There's also a cool aspect about that Tail Beacon X. I talked with Jody on this a little bit about this is, a lot of Stinsons, to my knowledge, most of them, I believe, are fabric fuselage. So what's really cool, some of the vintage aircraft that have the really, unique, nav lights and tail lights and markers and stuff like that, the Tail Beacon X installation allows for the Tail Beacon X to actually be installed inside the fuselage. It will get a GPS signal and transmit right through that fabric airplane. At that point, you can put an AV30 on a panel, put the tail beacon X inside the fabric fuselage. It's a sleeper, it's out of the elements, and it doesn't look like anything on the plane is changed from its original vintage, 40s, 50s, 30, whatever, look. So that right there is, a huge benefit for, keeping kind of a classic, call it a sleeper install, if you will. So.
I was just getting ready to ask you that question. A friend today was looking at my tail beacon on my Stinson, and he's got one of the old Pipers with those big globe things for light fixtures. And he says, I can't put that on my plane, and yet I need that. And
it can go inside the fuselage. I've actually had guys put them. Yeah, they've actually got guys that put tail beacon X, and even the tail beacon and sky beacon, they put them inside the fuselage. Fiberglass, if the airplane is a fabric fuselage, fiberglass, if there's a large, probably not on Stinsons, but if there was a large ABS wingtip or so, can go inside there. Aluminum and carbon fiber, not so much, but it can go inside the fabric or fiberglass.
Okay, so the silver on the fabric, the UV protectant under the paint is not enough metallic to stop the thing from transmitting through it.
Absolutely not. Yeah, there's no problem on that at all. We've got some OEMs and stuff that actually that's the way they install them. Both fabric and fiberglass, they install them inside. So I had one question here from a Thai. Looks like, do you have an estimate on when the tail beacon X STC AML will be available? So good news is this has been a very painful process with the STC AML during these pandemic times. Been very frustrating because many of the FAA are not working from the office, they're remote. We actually had to, we got a new contact. So things have drug pretty slow. We've done numerous requests and always had new data available for them as they wanted it. But my understanding that we had a meeting just yesterday and today with the FAA. So some information here. Essentially, they gave us approval to do the STC flight test and coordinate that ourselves, instead of having to have an FAA DER or agent on the plane when we fly. So we've got that all orchestrated. We've got the plane ready to go. We've got the pilot that's ready to go at a moment's notice. The FAA still obviously wants to watch and analyze the data in real time. So we, based on this and talking with them, we are I hesitate to say this, but we're cautiously optimistic, and that we will. So we have components to start building tail beacon X, and it is TSO'd. We can start as soon as we have that AML approved to start shipping. We're optimistic that we could have that before the end of the month and be shipping in December. Now, I will tell you, with the FAA and with the holidays coming, if we don't get that AML finalized by probably the week of Thanksgiving, it's gonna get a little more, probably after the first of the year. It just, once the FAA goes in holiday schedule after about, the Thanksgiving week, you got about a week or so, about a week in December, and then it's basically not going to happen until the first of the year. So we are optimistic that we will be shipping in December based on yesterday and today's meetings. But in the event that doesn't happen, we're pretty confident that it would be just after the first of the year based on the holiday schedule for them. So hopefully that answers it. It's kind of a politician answer, but I'm sorry. Any other questions?
Yeah. I don't think so. It doesn't sound like it. Anyone else?
I think that wraps it up.
Shane, on behalf of the International Stinson Club, I'd like to say thank you. I greatly appreciate the presentation and going through all the detail of your products. I've got my order in, so I'm waiting for I'm waiting for the AV30s, the two AV30s and the Tail Beacon X to come in. So as soon as they do and get it installed, I'll give a report back.
You got it. You got it. Well, and just so everybody knows, if you decide to do something like that with two AV30s and a Tail Beacon X, or two AV30s and an AV20, the two AV30s and AV20, that's just a straight through. You can put both of them in the order and run through. These can be ordered from us online. They can be ordered directly from, our resellers like Aircraft Spruce, Sporties, Gulf Coast, Pacific Coast, whoever's closest. If you have a preferred, listen, we promote all of our resellers. We wouldn't be here without them. I actually work with them on a daily basis. So, we're all trying to keep each other going in these times with aviation. If you do happen to come to our website and do it, as Jody probably found out, if you're going to do two AV30s and like a Tail Beacon X, you get the $400 bundle rebate on the two AV30s, and there is a bundle discount on the AV30 and Tail Beacon X. It ends up being $300 savings on the AV30 and Tail Beacon X, and then $400 on the dual AV30 rebate. It's about a $700 savings. The catch on that one, as he probably found out, you do have to do two separate orders, because an AV30 and a Tail Beacon X is a pre-order. It will not charge your card. It's going to pre-authorize it, and it's a pre-order. And then the second AV30 would be a straight out purchase, and it would charge and ship immediately. But our cart doesn't allow essentially mixing of a pre-order and a regular order. So you do have to do them you can just do them back to back if you want. So that way you'd have the two order receipts, one for the AV30 and Tail Beacon X, you get the bundle discount on that one. And then the extra AV30, you submit both of them for the rebate on the $400 mail-in, rebate, and you would get essentially both of them. So it's never happened before with us. So apologize. We've never really done any kind of large discounting like that on the AV30s, and so we got really aggressive for this holiday period, because we have units and our competitors don't, and perfect timing to save everybody a little bit of money.
Perfect. Thanks, Shane. We appreciate you.
You got it. Absolutely. Thank you. I guess since I am the host, if or acting host, if everybody is okay, then I'll go ahead and close it out and leave it. And since I have the leave button to end the meeting, so thanks everybody for allowing me to be part of this. And if you ever have any questions, you can call me. My extension is 209. My email is shane@UAvionix, and that's spelt like the brand with an IX at the end. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions or anything you might need. I'm here for you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody. Y'all have a great rest of your evening. Thanks for allowing me to have this time with y'all.
Great meeting. Thank you.